usually get a voice saying recording in progress, but that hasn't happened, but it does say recording. Okay, so welcome, and a special welcome to Enow Arrey. And I'm not going to introduce her because I'm going to ask her to introduce herself. So Enow, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, particularly professionally, where you work and what your work is as a teacher?
Thank you very much, Alan, for the question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Enow Njang Arrey. I am an English language teacher in Ibang, Yaoundé, Cameroon, and I have been teaching for 6 years. I have taught 3 years in the general sector and 3 years in the technical school. So presently, I'm in the technical school, and my school is found somewhere in a rural area here in Yaoundé. So I was so pleased when I fell on this topic. I said I should share my experience in my school. So I'm pleased to be with you in this webinar, and I hope you are all going to share your experiences too with us here.
Thank you very much, Enow. Okay, let's get started. So, as you know, this is going to be about textbook adaptation. And we're going to do it as a kind of conversation, kind of interview, if you like. So you're going to hear from me, but mainly from Enow. I'm going to be asking her some questions about the principles and the practice of textbook adaptation. But the main part, the main focus of the presentation is going to be some particular examples from Enow's own work of ways in which she has made adaptations to the published material she's been working with. So you'll get some of the principles first, and then some very clear illustrations of how those principles can be applied in practice. So this is an outline of the areas we're going to cover. We're going to start first by talking about the role of the textbook, about the limitations of textbooks. Textbooks are essential, but what do they sometimes or often fail to do, and what are the areas where the teacher often needs to complement or supplement the textbook. We'll talk about the division of responsibility. What do we expect textbooks to provide for us, and what should we as teachers expect to provide ourselves? What are some of the challenges, some of the problems that teachers have with working with textbooks? And then moving on to adaptation, the possible reasons for needing to adapt material in the book, adaptation strategies, and that's where Enow's illustrations are going to come in. What are the benefits, the advantages for the learner, and what can we adapt? What are the areas of the book that are available to us for adaptation? And then there'll be some resources and references at the end. So I'm going to start by asking you, Enow, what is a textbook for you? That's to say, what role does it play in your professional life, your life as a teacher? I'm going to do this by suggesting some metaphors. So what does the compass image suggest? In what sense might the textbook be a compass for you?
Oh, okay. So a compass, when I think of a compass, it's something that shows you a direction where to go to. So I think considering a textbook as a compass, it's a very great idea because a textbook shows you how how to deliver a content, not actually how, but it presents a plan of action. It gives you a structure, a guide on how or what to action. It gives you a plan of action of what to do. I'll consider
So,
a textbook as a compass provides a plan of action.
oh dear, we're losing your voice, Enow. I
Oh,
don't know.
sorry about that.
Ah, that's better. But I
Okay, so
think you were saying, yes,
can
go
I
on.
explain again?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I said a compass is something, is an instrument that shows you directions on where to go to. So if I'm to consider a textbook as a compass, I would say a textbook is a guide. It provides a plan of action of what to teach, because you cannot get into the classroom like that without knowing where you're going to. So the textbook actually shows you where you are going to, telling you what you ought to teach for this particular level for this student. So a textbook is there to show you where you are going to. So I can consider it
Absolutely.
that way.
Could you see it in some way as a recipe book?
Well, in my point of view, a recipe is something that gives you steps on how to have a particular outcome. I would say everyone has his own recipe. A textbook could prescribe a recipe, and that recipe may not go for your context, and you would, you know, do something else. You might change it to, you might have your own recipe. So I don't really think I'll consider a textbook as a recipe.
Okay.
Considering that teaching is flexible. So
Yes, yes. I think I don't think I know anyone who follows a recipe to the letter. Even if they refer to a recipe book, they then add their own
you
touches.
might want to add something that will reflect you a little bit. So
Yeah. Could the textbook be seen in some way as a holy book, a book that you follow?
well,
Hi.
as a hello, you're welcome.
Yeah, I wanted to intervene.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it cannot be seen as a holy book.
Well, I think that's what Enow is about to say.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. So let her continue.
Okay,
I'm so sorry.
Okay,
thank you.
thank you very much. Okay, so I was about saying the same thing. I cannot consider a textbook as a holy book, because if you consider a textbook as a holy book, there you are blocking your creativity. You put yourself in some sort of constraint, especially when it comes to delivering your lessons. And your lessons could at times be boring for the students and boring to yourself if you consider it a holy book. So I think teachers should try to be creative and be flexible. And I think this is important for new teachers to understand this concept of not considering a textbook as a holy book.
Right, that's a very strong answer. Thank you. Talking about new teachers, can the textbook sometimes act as a survival kit?
Yes, it can. Okay, I always look at my context. I always look at myself first. I don't know about others. So I can consider a textbook as a survivor kit. To the best of my knowledge, a survivor kit is it comes with instruments that you use during emergency. So there might be times where I cannot lay hands on authentic materials, and I make do with what I find in the textbook. So I can consider it as a survivor kit.
Right. And as I say, I think novice teachers, new teachers might find that they they depend on the textbook rather more in that way.
Yeah.
Here's somebody with a broken leg, I think, resting on a crutch.
Yes.
Is the textbook ever a crutch for you?
No, the textbook is not a crutch. In as much as I love the textbook is written by experienced people, so I really consider it a lot. But when it comes to contextualizing it and making it suit my learners' needs, well, maybe like a survival kit, I might rely on it once in a while, but not that much. I don't rely on it that much.
Okay, you prefer to be creative and do your own thing. Okay. Here's another way of looking at the textbook as a kind of supermarket. What do you think?
Well, I think it would depend on the textbook. There's some textbook that gives you the feeling of a supermarket, because a supermarket is the place where you meet a variety of things and you choose. But there are some textbooks that do not come with varieties. They come with things that you have the habit of saying. So it would depend. If I look at my situation, my textbook does not really provide varieties that I might choose. Because if a textbook has varieties, we won't be having that problem of going outside to get resources. So it depends on the textbook too.
I think textbook writers are always torn between having to provide regularity, recognizable structure to the unit, to the book, and wanting all at the same time to offer variety. And it's always a struggle between those two things.
Exactly.
Can the textbook be a straitjacket?
Oh, that takes me back to the holy book. Yes. So a textbook cannot be a straitjacket, because, like I said earlier, if you are not able to add something, if you're not able to add or supplement something into the textbook, then your teaching will not be really a successful one, especially when you understand your students' needs.
Right. Okay. Let's add one more, see what you think about this.
Okay, now it gets really interesting. So I consider a textbook actually as a springboard. It's a starting point for something. You don't just teach like that. You need a starting point, and a textbook provides a starting point. It provides a plan of action, a guide for you, and definitely I'll consider a textbook as a springboard. Definitely.
Right. I think we've built up a very clear impression of you, beginning to see what you are like as a teacher, but a very clear impression of your relationship with the textbook and the part that the textbook plays and the part that you play. And let's explore this a bit more. What do you think is often missing from textbooks? In what ways can they be deficient? What do they often fail to give you as a teacher that you need?
Well, in my context, textbooks provide listening activities, but they do not provide listening resources for these listening activities. And it makes it quite difficult for teachers to teach listening. Or they make listening quite a routine, where it's the teacher who is always reading a text. Meanwhile, I think students to be given the opportunity to discover, maybe when it comes to accents, to listen to something coming from a different context, to make them used to listening to other people than just listening to a teacher's voice. So there are no links. At times, I think textbooks should provide links where teachers can easily get listening resources, rather than just presenting a text where the teacher has to read all the time. So that is where I think.
Have
my
you
textbook.
have you come across any particularly useful resources for listening, Enow?
Yes, I have listenwise.com. I love going there to get listening resources. I have the British Council also has podcasts where you can get short videos of interesting activities, interesting listening podcasts where you can teach in your classroom. So I go there and I get listening activities, listening materials from there.
What was the first one called? Was that Listen Wide?
Listenwise.com.
Okay. Perhaps you could put that in the chat box later on so everybody can have a note of it. Don't worry about it now. And this is something else I know. Yeah.
Yes, very, very, very important, especially when it comes to textbooks. Many times we realize the texts are not culturally appropriate for your context. So it is true the textbook cannot provide everything, but the text, many people find themselves adapting because the text doesn't really suit their context or the localities where the students are found. So textbooks are deficient at that level, and we cannot say it's actually a big problem because textbooks are generally written for everybody and not for a particular person.
Right. And we're going to see an example of that later on. There are things that textbooks do, but they don't do enough of. So are there some areas of the textbook where you find yourself wanting more?
Okay, like I said earlier, authentic text that will actually assist the context, listening material resources, and we also have language activities, production activities, where the textbook will provide a variety, but it's actually, the activities are actually inadequate, not enough for the teacher. And lastly, the procedure, how to carry out the activities they propose in the textbook, which is usually missing.
We're losing your voice a bit again. I don't know what you did before, but it worked.
Oh, can you hear me now?
That's much better. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I think we heard that, but I was just aware of it getting fainter again.
Okay. So, like I said, the activities, there are no variety of activities. We find most of the activities are what we've been doing every day, and it gets boring. It's once in a while, it is good to surprise students. It's good to make them really get involved in the learning process. But textbooks are quite inadequate in that aspect because they provide one and the same activity.
Right, it's that need for variety again, isn't it, and creativity that you mentioned before.
Yes, the procedure. The times some textbooks lack teacher notes, or they could be teacher notes, but the teacher notes are not really that elaborate on how you can carry on the teaching process. Well, at one time, I think maybe they want teachers to really put in the effort to work rather than giving everything to the teacher.
So, who does what? What does the textbook do, or what should the textbook do, and what should the teacher do? What can we expect from a good textbook?
A textbook should provide the content, everything that you need to teach for a particular level. Like I said, when we were talking about the metaphors, this textbook should provide a plan of action on how to carry out the content that it proposes for a particular level. So the textbook should show the what you are supposed to teach for a particular level. think that way it makes the teacher know the direction where he or she is going to.
So if the textbook provides the what does the teacher provide?
The teacher then will provide the how. The teacher will take the content and identify if this content is suitable for my learners and determine how to deliver the content. So the teacher is more into how to deliver the content provided by the textbook. That is where our focus is today, how the teacher is actually going to deliver the content depending on his or her learners' needs.
Right, you made the point before that teachers' notes are often not very inspiring. And so the responsibility falls on the teacher to be concerned with procedure. I suppose a good textbook would give the teacher some good prompts, some good ideas for procedure as well. Now, here's another question. What could be provided by the learners? We haven't mentioned the learners up to now. We've been talking about the textbook and the teacher and the textbook. What about the learners?
Of course, we cannot talk about what could be provided by everybody and leave out the learners, because everything is all about the learners. 21st century, we talk about learner-centered learning. So we cannot talk about everything and leave out the learners. So the learners can select text. The teacher can invite the learners to select text. And how can that actually happen? For example, a teacher can ask students to go home and select a text on related topics and come to them with class. Or the teacher can come up with text and give the students the opportunity to choose text that they feel comfortable with. I think this is very important when you give students the opportunity to choose, because it creates a good learning atmosphere. It motivates the students and makes them interested in the learning process, and also makes them aware that the learning or it makes them aware of the responsibility they carry out when it comes to their own learning. So I think it's very important. So the next one, extending tasks. Of course, you can also learners can also extend tasks. I'm going to take an example of my one of my lessons I was teaching. I taught a lesson on recycling, and before coming to class that day, I told students to read about recycling. And when we came to class, my intention was to make students know about how we can recycle things around us. But that day, the students came up with ideas that I did not expect. They took knowledge from what they had, what they have been doing. And I'd like to precise, these students were electrical engineering students. So they came up with ideas in their electrical engineering field and brought to my classroom, and which was so interesting. They talked about recycling to energy for light. They talked about light. They talked about plants, something I had never known before. So it was kind of an interesting activity. I gave them time to come up with something like presentations, very short presentations, since it was not something I actually expected. So they came up with short presentations and they presented to their mates, and it was quite interesting because they learned from their peers. So I think learners can actually extend tasks.
So the two-way relationship between the teacher and the textbook can actually become a three-sided partnership with the learners as well, contributing content to the lesson. That's fascinating. And I guess you could say they were at a certain point, they were also creating something for the lesson, weren't they?
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to creating tasks. learners can also create tasks. Of course, the teachers need to always invite students to create tasks. I would say, for example, if you do a reading comprehension activity and you want students to choose a productive activity that they can actually demonstrate their knowledge. Their students can have the opportunity to choose a task. They might decide, you might ask them to choose, they might decide they want to do a visual act on a particular reading activity. They might decide they want to do a talk. Some might decide they want to do a presentation. And so students find themselves choosing where they feel they can meet the cognitive demands of the task.
So you would give them a choice of the kind of task that they would like to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they don't all have to do the same thing.
They don't have to do all the same thing, and that also gives the opportunity for students to feel comfortable, because at the end of the day, the goal of the activity will be the same, but the process will not be the same.
Yeah.
So it gives an opportunity for differentiation, learners of different cognitive abilities. So I think it's important.
And what about testing? Could students test each other?
Oh, yes. Students could test each other. It could be through the activity you give them. They can decide to proofread each other or to do comments, discussions on presentations they are presented. And students could come up with comments, questions, to test their understanding of their peers. They could also do a proofreading or peer reviewing of what their peers have done in class. So, and I think some learners learn well when it comes to peer learning or peer testing and all that.
That's great, thank you. So, what are the challenges? We've talked about some of the shortcomings, some of the things that are lacking or insufficient in textbooks. What are some of the problems that teachers might have that might lead them towards developing adaptation strategies? This is something you said earlier, isn't it? I think you always use these words.
Yes, so textbooks are generally written for everybody. Textbooks are not written for people in particular. So that is one of the challenges teachers face with textbooks, which I think is, well, textbook cannot provide everything. Textbooks cannot satisfy everybody. So that is one of the main problems faced with textbooks. And I think as a new teacher some years ago, I faced this challenge. Well, with my years of experience, I realized there was a need for so much adaptation. Yes, the fact that learners textbooks are written for everybody, it means there's a particular group that will not be satisfied. So a textbook will not match the needs of so many. So textbooks will not only match the needs of a particular group of people, it might also not match the needs of the students as individuals. So that's another challenge.
Yeah.
And the time pressure. Some of us, we have a classroom of students with mixed abilities, so it takes a whole lot of time to start every student and start the departments they encounter, especially in the learning process. So, and textbooks are prescribed for a time frame that you need to teach for a particular level, and maybe you might end up. Yes, Alan.
And teachers are often under a lot of pressure, aren't they, to get through the book?
Get through the book. Meanwhile, you cannot. Learning experiences are not the same everywhere. I teach in a rural area, and a teacher might find it easy to cope with the book but I cannot find it easy because of my learners level. So I need to make sure the learners learn and actually integrate what they are learning.
So these are very powerful reasons for the need to adapt the textbook in lots of different ways. So you've talked about different levels within a class. I don't think I've ever taught a class that was one level. All classes are mixed level. So that might be one very strong reason for needing to play with the textbook and adapt it in different ways.
Yes. So we adapt a textbook to make it accessible for the learner's level. It is true, as making it accessible to the learners might be to simplify it to their level, which is not always good all the time. It is good to make learning at times challenging for learners, but challenging at their level of understanding. So we adapt at times to make the language accessible for the learners. There are times learners find themselves.
So you would say,
yes, Alan?
You would say simplify, but don't oversimplify. Is that right?
Don't oversimplify, yes, because there's a need for students to learn and feel challenged while learning.
And you've talked before about the risk of boredom, of repetitiveness, and the need for variety.
So there is a need for variety. It could be variety in terms of practice. The students need to learn, because we are dealing with students. We talk about students who are of different levels, students with different needs. So providing a variety of practice enables students with different cognitive needs to actually meet a certain the needs of most of those practices. So it is good to provide a variety of practices where students can actually meet the needs of those practices. When we talk about variety, we also talk about materials. There should be a variety of materials. There are students who feel comfortable reading text. There are students who feel comfortable expressing themselves when it comes to visual aids. So there is then need to get a variety of text, a variety of visual aids. The students can actually feel comfortable and concerned in the learning process.
So this point relates very much to the need for differentiation. But it also, interestingly, it mentions teachers. So teachers need choice and variety as well as students. Teachers also need to be, they also need to be engaged with different materials, not always doing the same thing. You mentioned before the shortcomings of teachers' notes very often.
Exactly. So we adapt to bridge the gap in teachers' notes. Teacher notes at times are not really elaborate for teachers to actually teach well, to deliver the content very well. So we adapt to bridge that gap that exists in teacher notes.
Right, and I can almost see in my mind's eye the teacher with a thought bubble above her head, yeah, that's saying, what can I do with this? How can I use this?
How can I use this?
Because the book isn't telling her.
Alan, I have a problem. There's somebody asking on Telegram who is sharing the slide.
Oh, Jamila should be doing it. Just a moment. Let me pause the recording. Okay.
Okay, so thank you all for being patient. we are now at the level of lesson planning. So we adapt to make our lessons really to attain our objectives. When we teach learners with specific needs, we want to make sure that we actually reach our objectives. So if we adapt lessons, I think lessons could be successful and purposeful at the end of the day. So we adapt to make successful lessons and also provide the teacher with support for their lessons.
And the point about cultural appropriateness, I think you made quite strongly earlier. And I know you'll be showing us an example of that shortly.
Yeah, exactly.
And the last point, I think you've also touched on, because you talked about different learners having different...
Providing variety.
Yeah, but different learners having different preferences about the way that they access information, that some learners are more visual than others. And I think anyway, textbooks need, you need visual variety, don't you?
Of course. It permits students to discuss more, to exchange more, and you might be so surprised in what students will have to say concerning a picture. So it's important to have that variety when it comes to pictures.
Yeah, it can bring out so much more. So how do you decide when to adapt and what to adapt?
Okay, so at this level, like I said earlier, we teach students of different capacities, students with different needs, and individual differentiation will have to do with meeting students' individual needs, learners' individual needs. And meeting learners' individual needs could be through the content, could be through the process, or the product. And when I talk about, I would like to give an example. When you talk about the content, like I earlier mentioned, you can decide if you're given, you want to teach them something about reading comprehension or picture. You can decide and ask students, do you want a text or a picture? There are some students who can choose the text. There are some students who can choose the picture. And you will realize at the end of the day that the picture, what you have to do is the picture and the text should have the same storyline. And you will realize that students who chose the picture would come up with a story that is quite related to what is in the text. So I think it is very important to give learners that opportunity to choose. It also makes them feel comfortable. It also makes them take responsibility of their own learning. So it's when you give them that preference.
That's really what you've been talking about.
Learner preferences,
yeah.
Of course, catering for different learners. It is true, this aspect is quite difficult in my context because of my large class sizes. But what I do is I group students. There are times I need to group students in a particular learning ability. I group them together and I put the students who are weaker, I put them together. The students who are kind of stronger, I put them together and I give an activity. I might make the activity quite challenging. For example, I could give a sentence or sentences on the past tense. Yesterday, I dash to make, and I give that to the weak students. And I go to the stronger students and I say, yesterday, I did. Yesterday, and I leave it. And I ask the stronger students to complete it with any verb in the past. Why the weaker students, I give them the opportunity, I give them a verb and I ask them to conjugate in the past tense. After they do that, I would then take the activity from the stronger group and give them and give to the weaker group. I think that gives the opportunity for scaffolding to move them from one level, cognitive level to another. So it is also essential to cater for different learners' needs. It kind of builds that confidence in the student. It kind of motivates them and makes them feel their needs are also taken into consideration. Of course, learner independence, when you give learners the opportunity to choose, when you involve learners in the learning process, they somehow take responsibility over their learning and take it seriously. So I think it's and also it just adds to the concept of differentiation and learning preferences, like we earlier mentioned. Learning challenge, of course, it's a very, very important aspect, especially when it comes to talking about different learners and also making a learning activity challenging. When you get in the process of that's a scaffolding process where you prepare learners for higher order thinking skills is important. When I talk about challenging, for example, if you make an activity challenging for the learners, you kind of build their higher order thinking skills. You can also build higher order thinking skills in weaker learners when you get involved in the process of scaffolding, preparing them for higher order thinking skills. So when we adapt lessons at times, we adapt them to make learners develop their higher order thinking skills, especially when it comes to making the activity challenging for the learners.
Right, and now we get on to Enow's examples. She's going to show you some of the challenges that she's had with her textbooks and the ways in which she's dealt with them. And we're going to just frame this with 4 different types of strategy. 3 that involve changes to what's in the book, and 1 which you'll find out about a little later. So tell us about the first one, Enow.
Okay, so when we talk about there are times where you find an activity in the textbook and you feel it is not actually enough. You might want to add to make it actually look meaningful, especially for your learners. So you can add something to what the textbook proposes. Okay, you can also change it if you think the activity is not really quite good enough or could actually be boring for your students because they have the habit of seeing this particular activity. You can actually change it to make it interactive for the students. Okay, there are times also you can have an activity and you feel the activity is lacking something in it. And you can add or bring something into the activity, the same activity that the textbook provides. So you can bring something into the activity to actually make it a worthwhile. And there are times if you don't actually you think the activity is not really good enough, you can replace it with another activity.
So tell us about this one, Enow.
Okay, so this is a picture, actually a picture that talks about different seasons, 4 seasons. And I'm in a country, I'm in Africa, my students don't know about 4 seasons. They know about 2 seasons. And hope I get into the textbook, I fall on a text like this, where the text, I found a picture like this. There is nowhere where the picture talks about what we experience in my country, Cameroon. We just go immediately to 4 pictures, and the picture is asking them to talk about, they have questions here. Match these seasons with the trees in the diagram: summer, winter, spring, autumn. Talk about the seasons and the months in the area where you live. Do you have 4 seasons, 4 different seasons? Describe what happens in each season. When I came across it, I was like, the way I was embarrassed, I'm sure my students would have been more embarrassed. So I thought as much that I had to adapt this lesson, not really deleting this because it does not suit my context. So I thought it as an opportunity for me to introduce learners to something different for them to compare. So I had to add something to these images. So what I did was I got images from Google, from the internet, and I added to what was existing in the textbooks. So I took images of the dry and rainy season, and I added to it. So this activity now gives students to make comparisons about these 2 cultures, 2 contexts. I have students discuss in pairs or groups what the set of images are about. Students could read a dialogue.
Hi, Menge. I'm in Paris. It's winter here. Where are you? Oh, Enow, you've frozen. So hopefully Enow will come back. But in the meantime, I'll just continue. No, I don't think that's her. I know roughly what she was planning to say, but this is her material, so it really ought to be her talking about it. But she has produced this presentation, so the ideas are all hers. So as she was saying, she would add the 2 pictures of the dry season and the rainy season, which students can relate to, have them discuss what the images are all about, and then read a dialogue. Here we are. 2 friends, one in Paris, one in Yaoundé, and they're talking about the weather. What's it like where you are? And Alex says, in Paris, it's white and snowy and very cold. Trees have lost their leaves. Menge is curious about the seasons. Is it always cold there? No, we have 4 seasons here in France: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. She's back. Okay. Hi, Menge. I'm in Paris. It's winter here. Where are you?
Hi, Alex. I'm in Yaoundé. It is dry season here. It's sunny, hot, and dusty.
Here it's white, snowy, and very cold. The trees have lost their leaves.
Is it always cold there?
No, Menge. We have 4 seasons here: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. What about you?
We have 2 seasons here, the rainy and the dry season. The rainy season is my favorite. It rains, it's cold, and the trees are green. In the dry season, there is little or no rain, and some trees become dry.
Interesting. Just a moment. I'm going to mute everybody, and you'll have to unmute yourself, Enow. Interesting. In spring, it's rainy and sunny. the trees have beautiful flowers. Summer is the hottest season. The trees are green and bear fruit. In autumn, it's cold and windy, and the trees change their color to yellow.
Okay, so after this, I take now students back to the pictures and ask them, which one do you think is picture A? Which do you think is picture B? Which do you think is picture C and D? And ask them questions about the other pictures, and it's obvious they will say winning and dry swimming. So I use this opportunity to compare the two weathers in different contexts, so that students can also learn about the climate conditions in other contexts. And at the end, I ask them to write down the characteristics of each season in their books to make the learning quite to make them integrate what they have learned.
So it's not just about replacing, or it's not simply about replacing an unfamiliar context with a familiar one, but of bringing the two together and having the students learn something about other parts of the world.
Yes, about other parts of the world. Exactly.
But not just learning about the other, matching or adding new knowledge to what they already know.
What you already know.
Yeah, combining the familiar and the unfamiliar. So that's
Exactly.
I think that's a really nice example. Okay, Enow, you'll have to unmute again and tell us about this one.
Okay, so this is an activity. These are two parts of the unit. The first part. Okay, Alan, can I?
Yeah,
okay.
Just going back. Here we are.
Okay, so we have the first part of a unit which talks about daily house chores, which I think is important. This is a lesson I taught to my students who do accounting and commerce. Teaching them daily house chores, I think, was important for them to know the vocabulary of what they do at home. I taught them everything about washing plates, mopping the floor, sweeping, cleaning the house, cooking. It was important for them to know about things they do. But when I go to the second part of the unit, I discover it's still talking about daily house chores. Meanwhile, we have done something in the first unit, which is about daily house chores, and I think they already have the necessary knowledge they need to know about daily house chores. So what I did was I had to replace the second part of the unit with a lesson I found online. So I changed the second part of the unit and I replaced it with a lesson I found online, specifically from 21st Century English Teacher.com. I got this lesson, which I thought would get my students really engaged because it's actually showing them what their future chores will look like. So we had to discuss the vocabulary. Even at that, I still had to adapt this lesson I got online to make it really look like what the students would love to have. Maybe I had to change some things in the lesson, but I thought it wise for the students to know how their future chores in their workplace would look like. And I deemed it necessary because they had already talked about house chores, so it is important for them to talk about something that would look close to what they do in life. So I had to replace the second part of the unit with this lesson I got online. The lesson to me was quite interesting because it also had grammar points talking about adverbs, usually, hardly, ever, always, sometimes, once in a while, to talk about office routines or office chores. So this is how I adapted this lesson. So we move to another part, another lesson. Sorry. So this is a reading passage that comes with a picture. And the passage is quite very long, and we know how students hate long passages. So I made them for pre-reading activities. I made them brainstorm on the picture to talk about what they think the picture will be all about. There are actually two pictures. I made them brainstorm about the pictures. And the next thing, I asked them to discuss the title. And after that, we discussed the vocabulary. That is pre-teaching vocabulary found in the text. Now, what do I do with the text? Since the text is very long and I know my students don't like reading long text, I divided the text into segments. Now, dividing the text into segments, what do I really do with it? I put the students in pairs or groups. So depending on your class size, I have a large class size. So definitely I divided them into groups and give them different segments of the text. The students read their segments of the passage and provide summaries. The teacher goes around monitoring and offering help where necessary. A student from each group shares the summary to the others in the class. And to make it more engaging, students could be asked to make predictions of what the next part of the story would be all about. After all the summaries are made, students bring them all together and create a sequence of events and construct the story as a whole. The teacher then reads the story again for students to confirm their predictions. At the end, the students could decide on the productive skills to integrate. It could be letter writing, it could be slogans, or drawing of posters. Of course, this activity was quite a success because I gave them the opportunity to actually choose where they can demonstrate their knowledge. So as you see, I transformed this reading activity, which was a good one that was provided in the textbook, but to make it more engaging, I had to bring something to it that is changing the reading activity to a jigsaw reading activity. And it was quite engaging and students loved it because it wasn't the kind of routine that they had to read questions and answer, but I got them more engaged in the learning. They had more to offer. And at the end of the day, it was interesting because students came up with a whole lot of slogans. Some wrote letters addressing the minister on how to address climatic conditions or climate change in the country. So it was quite interesting. This one right here is originally a reading activity, and students are asked to read about imaginary characters. So I thought this activity, and they're asked to read imaginary characters and copy and complete this dialogue. So I thought the activity would be quite boring and less engaging. So what I did is I changed it to I replaced it with a speaking activity instead of a reading activity. And how did I do it? I replaced the reading activity with a speaking activity called Find Someone Who. Find Someone Who is actually an activity that is used in every field. It could be in the sciences or the arts. So you can adapt the activity Find Someone Who the way you want it. So what I did is, or what I do with my students is, I always tell them find someone who, when I say find someone who, they know it means they should find someone who they really relate with, whom they can really work with. And when I say find someone who, immediately they get their pairs. So instead of students reading about imaginary people, this is an opportunity for them to learn more about their classmates. So this lesson was actually was the introductory lessons in the beginning. So I thought it would be an opportunity for them to learn about their classmates instead of reading something about imaginary people. In a large class, the teacher could write the questions on the board and read them out and set time limits for each question. Students will need a paper and a pen to take notes Okay? If they're asking questions to their friends, they'll need to write things out. And when you divide them into groups, the students should get partners by raising their hands without saying a word to make the class less noisy. Of course, classes like this, when you ask them to look for partners, they're usually noisy. But you need some classroom arrangement or classroom management techniques to make it less noisy. So with this exercise, students are to ask their partner set of questions like, what is your name? Where were you born? Or when were you born? How many siblings do you have? What is your best subject in school? What is your favorite hobby? So make students change partners, and students who get information about many people get points. Of course, this is quite a technique to motivate them and also make it really engaging. At the end of the exercise, they could write down something about some of their classmates and read them out to their classmates. I learned this about this person, and at the end of the day, some of them will realize that they have some things in common. So it's a way of making an activity really engaging.
Okay. Back to you, Enow. Sorry about delay.
Okay. Okay, so what can, yes.
Go on.
Okay, so the next part, what can adaptation do for the learner? Okay, the first one, we talk about localization. Adaptation makes learners to find themselves in, it makes learning reflect their locality. It makes learning reflect their context, and they find it more interesting when it is adapted that way. Adaptation also meets learners' individual needs, which is very important, especially when it comes to satisfying learners' needs, meeting their individual or giving them activities that will meet their level. So I think adaptation will do more for a learner as an individual. Modernization, adaptation, not only helps to widen the learner's horizon, but it makes them learn more, because in the course of adapting, learners are more engaged in the activity and they learn better when they are involved in the learning process. I don't know if I've explained that better.
Yes, you have. It's very clear.
A simplification, okay. Adaptation can simplify. It could make it complicated, okay. By simplifying, we can simplify the language, the activity, or whatever, or we can make it challenging by making it complicated for some learners to develop their higher order thinking skills, like we mentioned earlier. Adaptation can also provide variety for students. It could be in terms of practice, it could be in terms of the materials they are to use in their learning. I mean, when they have a variety of practice and materials, it actually, yes, it broadens their horizon, and they learn more, they learn better. So it does a lot for the learner.
And so to sum up, what are the aspects of the textbook that we can adapt? What can be adapted?
We can adapt the language. It could be the instruction. It could be the explanation. It could be the text. We can adapt the text. It could be the exercise. As we mentioned earlier, changing one exercise to make it more engaging, or changing a text from something that is not really culturally appropriate to something that is culturally appropriate, or the output, what the students can write out or what the students can produce can be adapted. We can also adapt the process on how we can deliver a lesson. For example, grouping students, when we talk about classroom management, grouping students, changing an activity that has to be maybe quite an individual, maybe boring lesson, can make it a lesson where students can actually learn from their peers, interact with each other, and the tasks, and so on, changing the tasks, the activity. We can also adapt the content. We can make the content culturally appropriate, or we can, like we talked about the seasons, we can actually add something to what is already provided to the textbook. So, oh, sorry about that. Okay, so the level, the linguistic level, we can simplify it or make it challenging to meet the cognitive needs of the students.
So the answer is to that question, what can be adapted? Anything or everything, every aspect of the textbook can be adapted. Content, language, level, and process.
And process.
And just to conclude, this is a quotation that begins with the statement, good teachers are constantly adapting. How is that true? They adapt.
Of course, they adapt when they add an example that is not found in the textbook. They telescope an assignment by having students prepare only the even numbered items. They refer to an exercise covered earlier. They introduce a supplementary picture.
So all of those normal everyday classroom techniques that the teacher might use to save time or to remind students of something they've done before or to make the lesson more lively, those are all examples of adaptation. This isn't something that's new to teachers, it's something that teachers do all the time. So thank you very much indeed, Enow. Apologies to everyone for the interruptions to keep the Telegram group up to date. I'm just going to give them the last couple of slides, but while I'm doing that, the references are here. Very useful British Council sites that Enow referred to when she was talking about listening materials, where you can find texts, listening, recordings, ideas for lessons, and that's the 21st Century English Teacher blog that she also referred to. And these are the references to books and course books during the presentation. So we're still recording, but I've stopped the screen share, and I think we can manage another 5 or 10 minutes for questions, or if anyone's got any ideas of your own, examples of successful adaptation that you've done in your classrooms, now's the time to share it. So please raise your hand, use the reaction button at the bottom of your screen and raise your hand if you'd like to ask Enow a question or if you'd like to share any of your own ideas. You can turn your camera on and raise a real hand if that's easier. And Enow has just put the reference that we mentioned earlier, Listen Wise. I'd heard Listen Wide, listenwise.com as a good resource for online recordings. Any questions? Apparently not. Okay. Well, don't forget the Teaching English Africa website and the Telegram group. If you've got any feedback on this presentation, if you'd like to start a discussion, I've got one thing that I need to tell you before we go, and that is the link to the feedback form, which I'm putting in the chat now. So if you go to that link and complete the feedback form, it will only take you a few minutes, then you will receive a certificate of attendance. So if you want a certificate of attendance, please follow the link and complete the feedback form. Ibrahima, do you have a question? You have to unmute. Ibrahima, can you unmute? Yes. Hello.
Hi, Alan.
Yeah.
My concern is about adaptation.
Uh-huh.
When I adapt, I just cut off some part of the text. But I'm reluctant to add anything from on my own, because I don't want to betray the spirit of the initial text.
Right.
So my question is that are we allowed to add our own ideas, our own text to the text?
I think it's a very good question. And I think you're right to be cautious, and your instinct is absolutely right about being afraid to betray or to spoil the spirit of the original text. However, I think you can. I think it can be done if you do it very sensitively. Perhaps share it with a colleague, because I think it would be difficult for you to assess yourself the way that you've adapted it. But if you show it to a colleague, I think it would help to have another pair of eyes, someone who's not been involved with the adaptation, to give you some objective feedback about it. And I think, you know, a colleague would spot if you added something which was completely inconsistent with the original text. But I understand your reluctance to do that. But I think it can be done. But I agree, you have to be very careful, and perhaps get a colleague to give you some objective feedback on it. Enow, what do you think about that?
Yeah, of course, there's some people who have, they feel like he said he's afraid he's going to betray maybe the curriculum and something like that. But I think when you know, like I said earlier, I teach a particular group of students. So I think they need, my textbook was made generally and was not made specifically for them. So I think there's a need for me to adapt it to look like what they would need to know. But if you find yourself in a situation where you are afraid you cannot betray you don't want to betray the curriculum, okay, but I think you can bring something that is a personal touch, okay, from you, that is not in the textbook, because the textbook does not know your learners. you are the one who understands better your learners. So I think you shouldn't be that scared to really add something, a personal touch to what the textbook provides. You should bring something to it because you are the one standing in front of the students, and the textbook just gives you a content to deliver to students, and learning experiences are not the same everywhere. So I think it's a matter of you knowing your students and knowing what they really want and knowing how the lesson could really get to them and how to deliver it to them. So I think that is what is important.
Thank you, Enow. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Cisse.
You're welcome. Thank you for your answer.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I think we'll call this to a close. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for your patience and staying with us when we had some interruptions. I hope that didn't disturb you too much. And enormous thanks to Enow. It's a really interesting presentation and great examples.
Thank you, Alan. I'm grateful for the opportunity too. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being patient. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye, Alan.
Bye-bye.
Okay, goodbye.
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 Bye.
Bye, Enow. Thank you so much. That was
Bye.
lovely.
Goodbye.